Welcome back to another edition of the NBA Fantasy Baller DFS edition, brought to you by ResearchFantasy.com. For those of you who don't know me, my name on all sites is Nickfromcwe, and I'm here to bring you my three core plays for Thursday, March 9th, 2017. I'm hoping that my golf research doesn't play too much of an effect on how I present our basketball plays tonight. I find myself in my head talking through my picks, and it sounds like I'm getting ready to discuss PGA golf, but we'll hope that that doesn't make its way into this video. Last night was another kooky night in the NBA. You had some injuries. You had some people just completely and totally not show up. Specifically, again, looking at Reggie Jackson, who at this point has had to have played himself out of his contract in Detroit. If they can get rid of him, I'm not sure of what that is, but I've said it many times on our articles on ResearchFantasy.com. The dude is just he's trash. He played himself out of a good situation in Oklahoma City because he thought he was bigger than what's going on there. Stan Van Gundy gave him a chance in Detroit. Van Gundy looks like a train wreck most of the time. He's hurting the team by continuing to give Jackson minutes, but that's an entirely different story altogether. Our three core plays last night were Butler, Whiteside, and Drew Holiday. Butler had a good game. Whiteside had a good game despite the fact that the team just didn't give him shots. He was going into halftime with literally 2 shots. He was 1 for 2 from the floor, and I think he had and 1 with the 1 shot he made. I was really pulling at that point for Charlotte to win because that's just stupid basketball. You have nobody who can guard this position, but instead you want to go take a bunch of ill-advised 3-point shots. But it all panned out and worked. Drew Holiday just decided it wasn't for him. Wednesdays were not his favorite day to play basketball. Took what was a good matchup, and even after Anthony Davis went down, you would have assumed that, hey, I'm going to be able to step it up and I'm going to do, much better than I did before in the first half, and he just did not. He's now had back-to-back games where he's just looked pretty awful, for lack of better terms. So definitely some concern on that one. And our value plays actually came through for the most part. We were looking at Rodney Hood, who put up over a 30-point effort in a game where a highly injured Utah team completely took it to Houston. And this team's going to be a tough out. They're sitting at the 4 seed right now. It's going to be a tough out for whoever has to play them in the playoffs. Marvin Williams, huge night. Perfect bounce-back situation after his pretty poor outing the game before. And then Nemanja Bjelica, that game just had a really weird pace, and he had, I think, 1 rebound at the end of the night. So that one was an absolute total dud. But let's move on to today. I know I got killed last night by DeMar DeRozan, who just looked completely broken in the first half. Came back and salvaged things with around a 30-point game, but he was still 13.5 points short, which if he would have gotten that in the first half, we would have been singing a different tune tonight. All right. Crossing our fingers that we're not dealing with any injury situations tonight. Let's move on to our favorite plays today. As always, the question is to Russell Westbrook or not to Russell Westbrook. While he's not one of my core 3 plays, he's someone I absolutely will have exposure to. I do worry that this team, this Spurs team, is actually just too good for Westbrook and OKC in general to stick around with. I could definitely see a situation where we're looking at 97-79 going into the fourth, and Billy Donovan just says there's no need to run Russell Westbrook back out there, and he finishes the night with 48. or 50 fantasy points. And at this point, unless, everyone else, namely Kawhi Leonard and LeBron James, because they're the next most expensive players, unless they completely bomb out, which isn't likely, I could see a situation where Westbrook is not entirely necessary. Remember, this isn't a game like we had a couple nights ago where he was playing against a Portland team that had no answer. It wasn't a game against a Phoenix team that plays such a high pace that it's, an easy thing to tell that he's going to absolutely dominate. This is a Spurs team that plays slow, plays tough, and so this could be a night where you just might want to say, you know what, I'm willing to risk Russell Westbrook not being able to make it, and I'm just going to move on from there. All right, again, we're looking mostly at DraftKings for pricing. That's where I'm playing most of my tournaments because that's where I'm winning most of my tournaments. And we'll start things off with Andre Drummond, center, Detroit Pistons against the Cleveland Cavaliers. Vegas, I think, has like a 6.5 point line on this game. This is a road game for the Cavs. They've struggled sometimes on the road when they shouldn't have. 12-7 fantasy draft, $7,900 Fanduel, $6,800 DraftKings. Guys, come on. We're talking about Andre Drummond being now in the same price range as Jusuf Nurkic and Allen Williams. And it's no disrespect to either of those players because on DraftKings, I'm going to have 2 centers. I'm going to have 3 centers if I can. I can't think if we have a situation where we have some forward eligibility for our centers tonight. But when you think about the ceilings of these players, you have to know that Drummond's ceiling is much, much, much higher. I think Nurkic is probably around the 50-point mark. Allen Williams is probably around the early 40s, but Drummond we've seen put up some games where he's into the 60s. If he gets going and he's able to rack up 22 boards and he gets something like 18 points and he's dishing out assists and he's got a stat line, which he totally could with 3 blocks and 4 steals because somehow that's what he does, you're looking at a game that's going to very quickly approach 60 points on sites that give double-double bonuses. There's obviously some risk associated with them. The whole Pistons team in general is just a fantasy mess. You never know which guy is going to be the guy tonight. It could be Kentavious Caldwell-Pope because the Cavs are awful against shooting guards, but he's been awful in general. So it's really tough to say how we're going to fit that in, but I love the price on Drummond. I'm willing to take some risks with him tonight on DraftKings. Moving on. Let's go to point guard and let's roll with Mike Conley, 14K fantasy draft, 8K Fanduel, 7,400 on DraftKings. Again, to me, this is just a price point play. Conley's been getting some good matchups against some pretty high-paced teams that's allowed him to put together fantasy outings in the early to mid-40s. This game against the Clippers, have you watched them lately? This team is healthy and has no idea what they're doing together on the court. They made the Minnesota Timberwolves look like the Jordan-era Bulls. All right, that was probably a push a little bit, but you get what I'm trying to say. They've made teams like Milwaukee. They've given teams that should have had no chance in the game the door wide open and then ultimately the victory. There's a little bit of concern because there has been a negative impact on some of the players that have been playing against them. They just haven't really turned out great outings. I'm not looking at that tonight. I think that this is one of those playoff type situations where I could see a guy like Mike Conley feasting, and it's 7,400 for the upside to get a 45 to 50 fantasy point game on a night where Russell Westbrook could potentially struggle but still pull a large portion of the ownership. You have to look at Mike Conley in your lineups. Finally, I think the top play of the day has to be Kawhi Leonard. And I fought a little bit between LeBron James and Kawhi Leonard for my top overall play. I think both guys are looking at mid-50s for output, but Kawhi gets the nod because he's a little bit cheaper. 17.9 fantasy draft, 96 Fanduel, 97 DraftKings. This Russell Westbrook versus Kawhi Leonard should be an excellent, excellent matchup tonight. I'm not insinuating that they're playing on one each other, they're guarding each other, nothing like that. That's just, I think Kawhi Leonard will probably have Russell Westbrook in check from time to time because, they're going to put him on their best player. Danny Green could see him, but regardless, it's just the whole mentality. These are the 2 leaders of the team, and I think they could really have a nice game tonight. Value is slim pickings because, hey, we're on a 5-game slate. I think you can continue to look at teams like the Lakers and Phoenix who play each other in a fast-paced game for value. I'm going to try to offer some plays at the value spot that could even go underlooked a little bit from there. First up, Mareese Speights, 6K fantasy draft, 3,500 Fanduel, 3K DraftKings. So you're looking at across the board minimum pricing on Mo Buckets. He had been awful. I mean, I don't think he has had such a poor run maybe in his entire career, where basically from the start of the new year until now, he's just been horrible. But he's put together 3 straight games of 16-plus DraftKings points. At minimum price, if he gets 18, you're looking at 6x value from Speights. There's always the chance that he can do better than that. Like I said, the Clippers are struggling. We're not seeing great output from Blake or Chris Paul. Doc Rivers could just say, you know what, if Buckets is the one that's getting it done, I'm not going to hesitate to start to pull my starters out earlier so we could stay competitive and put him in. So he's definitely on my radar. Next up, Patty Mills, 7K, 3,700 Fanduel, 3,500 DraftKings. Why would I put Patty Mills in here? Is it an overreaction to last night? No, I'm shocked by last night. I really am, because if you look at the fact when Patty Mills is getting 27 and 30 minutes, he just hasn't been productive with it. But most of the time it's been with guys like Kawhi Leonard and LaMarcus Aldridge on the floor. I think that Pop is going to have to run a little bit of a quicker lineup tonight to stick with Westbrook, because you know how he plays. And that's going to leave Tony Parker kind of in a state of flux where I don't know how long Pop is going to let him roll out there. So Patty Mills, who was very much under-owned yesterday, I think in a lot of the tournaments I ran, he was sub 2% owned, which just didn't make sense. Thank goodness I had a little bit of him that really salvaged some of my lineups, because I had every bit of David Lee, which looked like a horrible bust going into halftime, but really panned out well. Next up, one of the most intriguing value plays, and I'm not going to sit here and lie and pretend like I know anything about this player, but let's roll with Shawn Long of the Philadelphia 76ers, 6K fantasy draft, an over value at 4,300 on FanDuel, 3K on DraftKings. Who's Shawn Long? That's half an actual question from me, and half, that's what most DFS players are probably going to be thinking. Well, he's playing center now because the Sixers decided their future was brighter without Nerlens Noel, and have been treated with Jahlil Okafor being injured for the last 2 games. Tonight is not looking good either. Rashawn Holmes is dealing with some hamstring issues, which is causing him to see less time on the court. Shawn Long played 23 minutes and came through with a little more than a point per minute production in that time. Now, we just dealt with someone who was a possible value play yesterday in Jordan Crawford, who came in and had a really strong first game but just completely bottomed out in the second game. And with the value tier, you're putting risk when you play these guys flat out, because they're priced at 3,500, 3,000, whatever it might be, for a reason, because they're either not very good, they're not producing, or they're new to their situation. I think that most players are going to pivot if they're looking for a value play from the Sixers to Justin Anderson, who I think is a good play even where he's priced at around the 4K mark between FanDuel and DraftKings, because he's been producing. But I think if you want to take the ultimate pivot and move on to, someone I just can't see a lot of players being on, Shawn Long would be your guy. That's all for now. Make sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel. Head over to researchfantasy.com, sign up for our mailing list to get all of our news and advice on the NBA each day. Make sure to follow us on Twitter at Research and Win, like us on Facebook, and join us tomorrow for our next one.